by today's event is being hosted by the Eye to the Future project team, and we're very much looking forward to a day of sharing, learning and interaction with you all. I'd like to extend a very special welcome and thanks to our guest speakers for today, to all of you, our participants, and to all Blind Citizens Australia staff who are supporting us throughout today's event. Before we begin, there is some housekeeping to mention. Can you please keep yourself on mute until question time? To mute on a computer, press Alt-A. To mute on a phone, press *6. Please note that we will invite you to ask questions after most speakers. And when we do invite you to ask questions, please raise your hand if you have a question, as the chat function has been disabled as it can interfere with screen readers. To use the raise hand function in Zoom, press Alt-Y on your computer. Press *9 on your phone. Please remember to first state your name when you're speaking. Please note this session is being recorded and will be made available on the Eye to the Future website. So please take this into consideration when you're making contributions or asking questions. Please be aware that we will have a break approximately every 1.5 hours. We will let you know when we're going to take a break, and we'll let you know what time to be back at your desk for the next session following each break. For our presenters today, we ask that you please have your video camera on when you are speaking. To turn your video camera on and off, select the video camera at the bottom of your screen or press Alt-V. To keep us on time today, we will ring a bell when there is only 2 minutes left for each speaker. I can hear that we have a participant who's not on mute. Could you please mute yourself? Thank you. I would now like to invite BCA's Vice President, Stephen Belbin, to perform the Acknowledgement of Country. Over to you. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Nicole. Just checking my audio's there at the moment.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. That's great. Thank you. Well, Yama Malia. Hello, friends. My name is Stephen. I'm a Berribilgal man, and my home is in Gadigal country in New South Wales in Sydney. But currently I'm talking to you all from the land of the Warramai people here in Port Stephens, New South Wales, up north of Newcastle on the coast. I'd like to take this opportunity to certainly acknowledge the traditional custodians of the many countries that we're coming across today through this virtual space, and also acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who may be present here in the meeting. I'd also like to show my respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders, past, present and emerging. And I'd like to share my deep connection to land, the waterways and community. Thank you. Over to you, Nicole.
Thank you very much for that, Stephen. Next, I'd like to introduce Blind Citizens Australia Chief Executive Officer, Sally Aurisch. Sally will speak about the work of Blind Citizens Australia and about changing community perceptions of people who are blind or vision impaired in the workplace. Thank you, Sally.
Thanks, Nicole. Good morning, everyone. I too would like to add my acknowledgement of country. Today I'm coming to you from the land of the Darkin Chunk people. So as Nicole mentioned, my name's Sally and I'm the CEO here at Blind Citizens Australia. And it has been my privilege and a pleasure to have been involved with the Eye to the Future project since it began back in 2019. Blind Citizens Australia is the peak advocate, the national representative organisation of people who are blind or vision impaired. And our purpose is to inform, connect and empower people who are blind or vision impaired and the broader community. And it's our pleasure to have you here with us today as we speak about employment, and in particular, employment for people who are blind or vision impaired. As I mentioned, the Eye to the Future project began back in 2019, thanks to some funding from the Information Linkages and Capacity Building Grant program that was then administered through the National Disability Insurance Agency. As you all are only too aware, 2019 was a time of of great change and of great challenge. And it was certainly a very difficult time to operate a project that focused on employment. During that 12-month period, we certainly had to do a lot of rethinking, reshaping and reimagining, as I'm sure that you in each of your respective businesses had to as well. It certainly wasn't the time to go out to businesses and talk about hiring a new person when some of us were unfortunately having to lay off tens of thousands of staff at the same time. And so instead, we focused our efforts and our attention on creating resources that we knew would stand the test of time, and also making links within the community so that when people did come back to work, when the landscape started to shift and change, then we were there, then we were prepared, and we had everything that we needed to ensure that we could support businesses, both large and small, as they sought to rebuild and re-establish their workforce under some different changes, some real shifts in the landscape. It was an absolute privilege when we found out that we would be offered a second round of funding and be able to restart our Eye to the Future project. And this is the real culmination of that funding. It's unfortunate that we weren't able to meet with you all in person. However, the one advantage that has brought is that meant that we've been able to gather people from across the land, not just those who were sort of conveniently located in Sydney. The last 12 months has seen us achieve some great things, and we look forward to sharing and showcasing those with you today. But it also has seen a significant change in times from what happened back in 2019. We are seeing businesses go from having to lay off staff to businesses crying out for employees. We are seeing companies offer incredible signing up bonuses, and we're seeing very few applicants, perhaps as few as 1.5 applying for every job that is advertised. And while these are perhaps encouraging times, it's also some further evidence that highlights the challenges that people with disability, and in particular people who are blind or vision impaired, face. Because unfortunately, the employment rate for people with disability remains unchanged at this point in time. And so as we gather today, it is our intention to help you to continue to reimagine, to rethink, and to redesign, and to perhaps challenge some of those myths and misconceptions that still stand around hiring people with disability, especially people who are blind or vision impaired. Today, you'll hear from a number of experts in the field. You'll hear from people who are blind or vision impaired about their experiences, about their thoughts for the future, and about how employment can be reshaped and reimagined to be inclusive and equitable of all people. You'll hear from people who have hired, who have supervised, or who have been supervised by people who are blind or vision impaired about their experiences and what that has meant for their workplace. And you'll also hear from people who provide services to people who are blind or vision impaired, who can make this employment journey a successful one. There is a lot of services and supports and different tools and programs out there and available, and we look forward to showcasing them to you today so that you too can continue to be an organisation that not only survives the coming years but thrives. Because we know that research has shown us that by ensuring organisations we work for have a diverse and inclusive workplace, that is one of the key drivers in achieving success and competitive advantage. In Australia, currently, 1 in 4 people identify as having disability. That is a huge percentage of the market. And one of the best ways to achieve competitive advantage is to make sure that goods, products and services that business offer meet the needs of all people, including those 1/4 of Australians with disability. And by ensuring that your workforce is diverse and reflective of the broader population, that's one way to achieving that sustainability and that competitive advantage. And we look forward to providing you with a number of resources and information and challenging some of those ongoing misconceptions and myths to making sure that we can help you achieve that diverse workforce that you need to succeed. And we know that today, that information will not only help you with the organisation that you work for now, but that you'll take it with you into the future, and that we will, through this work, continue to see that shift in perception that we need to make sure that the workforce is reflective of the broader population. It's been a pleasure to see the way that the Eye to the Future project has taken shape over the past 12 months, and to speak with many of the employers who have taken on our interns and hear the difference that these people have made to their organisations. And we look forward to sharing that with you as the day proceeds. So I will now hand over to you, Nicole, and I look forward to seeing how the day unravels. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sally. Now I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker for today, Graeme Innes. Graeme is a lawyer, mediator and company director, and was Australia's Disability Discrimination Commissioner from 2005 to 2014. And only a couple of weeks ago, Graeme was also appointed to the board of the National Disability Insurance Agency. Graeme will address the barriers to employment for people who are blind or vision impaired and the misconceptions or myths among employers. Thank you very much, Graeme.
Well, thanks, Nicole. And I too acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands from which we all come and on which we work, live and learn. I come to you today from Bundjalung land in Tweed Heads in New South Wales. Consideration of how to improve employment opportunities for people who are blind or vision impaired is more timely than ever today. Rising living standards and better healthcare mean longer life expectancy. And that means a number of things. First, as we get older, we're more and more likely to have a significant disability. ABS figures tell us that 20% of Australians, or more than 4 million people, have disabilities, and that this proportion is increasing, in particular with the ageing of the population. The Australian Institute of Health and Welfare predicts that, on average, men in Australia, as they age, can expect to live 19 years with a disability, 5 years with a severe or profound disability, while women living longer can expect 21 years of disability and 8 years of severe or profound disability. Of course, people with disabilities such as myself are helping many of you out, because many of us experience above the average number of years of disability, so we're bringing the average down for you. Second, the ageing of the population reduces the relative size of the workforce to the population overall. In coming years, there will be fewer of us to support more of us, so that as many as possible need to be working and paying taxes rather than receiving welfare benefits. Thirdly, because of the pandemic and other economic factors, we are in a record period of low unemployment. So employers have to act smartly to find employees, and even more smartly to find good employees who will remain with them. So what better time to ensure that disability doesn't needlessly prevent people develop skills for working, and that employees with skills who acquire disability do not waste those skills in unemployment or underemployment. Because of the frustration of not finding employment, many people with disability have withdrawn from the labour market, and people with disability who are employed earn lower incomes and frequently work well below their capacity. Today, I'm going to share my story. It's in my autobiography, Finding a Way, launched several years ago. But I'm going to share some of that with you today because it represents the story of many other people who are blind or vision impaired. Whilst growing up, I was lucky on a number of counts. Firstly, I was lucky in the approach which my parents used when bringing me up. I say lucky, but perhaps I shouldn't dismiss the innate good sense that they used when they decided, consciously or unconsciously, to treat me as just one of 3 siblings, rather than as a special child with a disability. Many kids with disabilities were not treated this way. Their parents, with the best of intentions, figuratively wrapped them in cotton wool. This meant that they didn't enjoy the same breadth and intensity of experiences which I enjoyed. It must have been quite hard for my parents, knowing that inevitably I would fail on occasions or have a negative experience. And those bruised foreheads or scraped knees must have hurt them almost as much as they hurt me. But the advantage for me in their approach, assuming that I could do things rather than assuming that I couldn't, whilst this meant that I ended up with a few more scrapes, bruises, and disappointments, it broadened my experience and gave me the sense that I could do what I wanted rather than limiting my options. I remember how dismissive I was of the careers advisor who told me that my craft work would need to improve if I wanted to have a good career in basket weaving. Secondly, I was lucky with that a good friend of my parents was totally blind and also a member of the New South Wales Parliament. This just reinforced the positive message. If he, as a person who was blind, could be a successful politician, then why couldn't I do anything that I wanted to? So I grew up not being limited in my expectations. Unfortunately, many Australians with disabilities are limited by the soft bigotry of low expectations. My careers advisor did not limit me, but I'm sure he did with many other kids who are blind or vision impaired. One of the largest barriers which people with disabilities face in Australia is the attitude barrier. Employers say it's all too hard, it might not work, there's too much risk, and people with disabilities will never fit in. Most employers have no understanding of disability until they have a direct connection with it. Thirdly, I was lucky because I knew exactly what I wanted to do when I left school. I feel for people who face the dilemma of figuring this out. From the time I was about 14, I knew that I wanted to study law. And I wanted to study law because I knew that changing laws was one way to improve society or improve opportunities for people in society. So I studied law. This was in the 1970s, when there were no computers, internet, or legal databases on the web. Many volunteers read law books onto reel-to-reel tapes. Yes, remember those? Or onto cassettes so that I could keep up with the reading. Many others manually translated books into Braille. I was not the first blind person to study law, but there were not many of us, so trails had to be blazed. Studying law for me was just hard work. Despite the enormous efforts of those volunteers transcribing books, I had more limited access to the range of materials which I needed to complete my degree. So I had to compensate by knowing the books which I did have better than anyone else. But after 4 years, I completed the degree. And whilst the work was hard, I can't deny that I also enjoyed a few of the extracurricular activities which go along with campus life, centering on the uni bar. I completed College of Law and started the process of finding a job. Over a 12-month period, I applied for about 30 jobs in legal positions with government agencies and with the private sector. I didn't get any of those jobs. Employers just couldn't understand how a blind person could function as a lawyer. And no matter how much I explained the methods that I would use, they were just not convinced. I had, growing up as a person with a disability, experienced discrimination before, but this was the first time that I really hit the wall of discrimination, which many people with disabilities face. And for 12 months, I couldn't get past that wall. I finally despaired and took a job in the New South Wales Public Service as a clerical assistant. I used to joke that I was the only clerical assistant in the public service with a law degree, but it was a job. It was with state lotteries, where one of my duties was to answer the phone and tell people the winning lotto numbers. And you really needed a law degree to do that. I was made redundant from that role by an answering machine. I moved to the Registrar General's office, where I spent my time answering phone calls from the public. But at least I was learning much more about the issues around conveyancing and property transfers, which I'd studied at university. From there, I progressed, still as a clerk, to the Department of Consumer Affairs. And it was this department, or more specifically, the Senior Legal Officer, who gave me my first legal opportunity as a clerk and then a legal officer. He wasn't totally convinced that I, as a blind person, could work as a lawyer, but he, unlike all of the others, was prepared to give it a go. Dave's change of attitude changed my life. I was finally being a lawyer. 1981 was the International Year of People with Disabilities. Amongst other things, disability groups successfully advocated for changes to the New South Wales Anti-Discrimination Act to include discrimination against people with disabilities. I joined the Anti-Discrimination Board as one of its conciliators when the amendments came into force. Pleasingly, I was not typecast. Whilst I clearly brought disability expertise from my lived experience and my knowledge of the disability sector, my caseload included discrimination complaints from all grounds covered by the Act, including race, sex, age, or marital status. My continued involvement in the disability sector meant that I was asked to chair the Commonwealth Government's Advisory Council on Disability Issues. And the major achievement of that council, whilst I was its chair, was the enactment by the Keating government in 1993 of Commonwealth disability discrimination legislation. I was able to play a part with a number of others in the crafting of that legislation. And I viewed this as one of the most important work tasks with which I had been involved. And then, after some time in the private sector and membership of a range of tribunals, for almost 10 years, I got the chance as Disability Discrimination Commissioner to administer that discrimination legislation which I'd helped to create. I also got the chance to be Australia's Human Rights Commissioner and Race Discrimination Commissioner. So, what got me to those positions? Well, as any good My Kitchen Rules contestant will tell you, it's not one ingredient which makes a dish. It was hard work through university and beyond, opportunities which arose, and my determination, which some call stubbornness, and an element of chance. My passion and commitment to what I was doing also contributed. But though I hadn't read this quote at the time, I very much followed the dictum of American Ziggy Ziegler. He said to be successful, you need to get up, dress up, show up, and never give up. Simple, easy to remember, motivating. People who are blind or vision impaired have to demonstrate resilience because our road is not an easy one, fighting those negative community attitudes. Research shows that people with disabilities stay longer in jobs, take less sick leave, make fewer workers' compensation claims, and because of the skills that we develop to manage our more complex lives, we make better managers. And all of those have been supported by research findings. But we're still employed at a rate 30% lower than the general population. And I think those figures underestimate how bad the situation is, because many have withdrawn from the labour market. So employing us is a contribution to improving the diversity and balance of the employee community, making it more representative of the community as a whole, and lifting people with disabilities out of social disadvantage. Because apart from the benefits these actions will bring to people with disabilities, if just 1/3 of that 30% disability jobs gap moved off welfare and into work, the National Disability Insurance Scheme would run at a profit within a decade. When I was young, many people told me that I couldn't be a lawyer, and many others wouldn't give me a legal job. But I, and people who supported me all those years ago, knew that I could. I can't imagine my life without the chance to take the risks that I took to get to where I am today. I can't imagine a society diminished because it lacked the contribution that many people with disabilities make in all areas of life. And I'm profoundly saddened by the knowledge that many people with disabilities, many people who are blind or vision impaired, were never encouraged to take those risks and grab those opportunities. People who are blind or vision impaired want to work. It's up to you as employers to say those small but very powerful words. You start on Monday. Thanks for the chance to speak with you this morning.
Graeme, thank you very much for sharing with us and the group this morning. That was really wonderful. We had asked our participants to submit questions prior to today's symposium, and Cheryl has the list of questions for us, if that's all right with you, Graeme, to do a question and answer time with us.
Yep,
thank you very much.
Very happy to do that, Nicole.
Over to you, Cheryl, for our first question, please.
Thank you, Nick. Graeme, our first question is, at the beginning of your career, what were the most helpful things that employers did to support you?
Well, as my story indicates, in the first 12 months, there weren't many helpful things. I went to at least 30 interviews and didn't get a job. But the most helpful thing that Dave, the first employer who really supported me, did was to accept my story, my explanation of how I could, as a blind person, work as a lawyer, and believe me and take me on in that role. So that was for me the key change which provided me with that opportunity. I guess other things that employers do is at every interview you should ask, well, you should ask anyone, but you should particularly ask a person with a disability how they will carry out the job, what changes they will need in order to carry out the job. For most of us, it's very few. It might be using the same desk all the time rather than having to hot desk and find a new one and set it all up. It might be needing a voice output device attached to a computer. It might just be improving the lighting in the particular area that we work. But we're the experts in our lives, and we'll usually be very happy to have that conversation if you ask the question. Most people, for reasons that I'm not really clear about, don't ask the question and then make their decisions based on the limited and negative assumptions that many in the community make about people with disabilities.
Thank you, Graeme. The next question we have is it okay to ask about disability during job interviews, and how can I do this without appearing to discriminate?
I think it's more than okay. It's absolutely essential. And what you need to ask is the question that I just framed. You know, you clearly have the disability, or you've told us that you have a disability. What adjustments will you need in order to carry out this job? And most people with disabilities will be more than happy to have that conversation with you. It will be a refreshingly open conversation that most of the time we don't get the chance to have.
Great, thank you, Graeme. The third question, as an employer, how would you suggest that I create a comfortable environment for candidates to disclose their disability in an interview?
Well, this question has a really important built-in assumption in it, and that is that it's not up to people with disabilities to disclose our disability, and many of us won't if we can avoid it. It's a bit hard for me when I walk into a room with a guide dog or a white cane, but many people have hidden disabilities. Probably more people have hidden disabilities than those who have visible disabilities. And the only way that employers can reliably get people with disabilities to disclose our disabilities is to make the environment comfortable and welcoming for everyone, which includes people with disabilities, and not to give any indication that there's any intention of discrimination. So putting that in advertisements that people with disabilities are welcome to apply, celebrating successes, celebrating international days of people with disabilities, celebrating employment targets reached for employing people with disabilities, having more people with disabilities in the workplace, so making it clear that this employer is an employer welcoming of people with disabilities, and having leaders in the organisation just reinforcing that message that we want a diverse workforce, and diversity includes not just women, not just people of different cultural backgrounds, not just Aboriginal people, but also the largest minority, the largest disadvantaged minority, that is people with disabilities.
Terrific. I'll just read out the next question. What if I ask an employee who is blind to do something they can't do because of their blindness or vision impairment? Is this discrimination?
Well, it's not. I don't think it's discrimination to ask someone to do something, but it's very important to listen to the explanation of why that may be more challenging for the person, or more relevantly, what adjustment that person would need in order to do that task. You might ask me to travel to 4 or 5 different court venues around a city. I'm just thinking of, my role as a lawyer. And I might say to you, look, I can do that effectively, but in order to do that, I would need something like AIRA, AIRA, which is a service that you can buy by the month, where an agent uses the camera of your phone to assist with your navigation and with finding locations. And so that might be a reasonable adjustment that you ask for as an employee. So I think it's important to ask all of your employees to do the things that you need or want done, but you have to be then prepared to have a conversation about how that might cause a problem in a person's life. And in the same way that if you say to a parent, for instance, that whose normal working hours are 8 till 3 or 7 till 3, that you want them to work 2 days a week until 5 o'clock, and they say, well, that's a problem for me because I pick up my kids from school at 3:30. Then you have to be able to adjust your thinking around that. In the same way, you have to be able to adjust your thinking to meet the reasonable adjustments of a person with a disability or person who's blind or vision impaired.
Terrific. Okay, do you still find that there are barriers for you today when you're looking for employment? And if so, what are those barriers?
There are. Barriers are still there. And mainly the barriers are negative assumptions about what a person with a disability won't be able to do. Even in the last 5 or 6 years, you know, I've had conversations about, well, how will you be able to read material, or how will you be able to travel effectively in this role? And when I've demonstrated for years that I can do all of those things, but the limiting and negative assumptions still remain. And for people such as myself who've reached senior leadership positions, it's not as hard to get past those barriers. But for people just entering the workforce, or at a different place in their careers, that can be a real challenge. And often, sadly, that question doesn't even get asked. The assumptions are made that the person won't be able to do those things, and they don't get the job as a result, or they don't get the promotion as a result, or they don't get the training as a result. I've been listening to an excellent set of podcasts. Any of you who are podcast listeners should grab this podcast called Let Us In by Kurt Fernley and Sarah Shands. They're on the ABC, and it's a great series of podcasts. And Kurt talks about how excited he was to get his first job. And his workmates took him out to celebrate the first job at the end of the first week when he got his first pay packet. And they went to a venue which had steps up front, and he couldn't get in. So, you know, those are the sorts of things employers need to be thinking about.
Thank you. We've got 2 more questions, if that's okay, Graeme. Have you ever worked in an organisation where your colleagues or your boss wasn't supportive? And if so, how did you manage that situation?
I think I have. You know, early on in my career, I've certainly worked in organisations where my boss didn't think that a blind person would be able to succeed to the level that I knew I could succeed, and so I remained as a clerical assistant or as a clerk. I guess I just kept on working hard to demonstrate that I could be successful in those sorts of roles, and that's what we as people with disabilities have to do. You know, the path for employment for us is always going to be a harder path. It's very sad that that's the case, but there's no point sugarcoating it. That is the reality. We're going to have to start lower down the ladder. It's going to take us longer to be successful in gaining those promotions or transfers or training opportunities. And sometimes we won't gain them at all because people will just make negative assumptions about us. That's a really tough lesson to learn as a person with a disability, but it is the reality. And so, and the other thing will be that it'll be very much harder to get our first job than it will be for anyone else. And my story sort of demonstrates that.
Okay, thank you. The last question. Okay, this is about your recent appointment to the NDIA board. What are you looking forward to achieving during your time on the NDIA board?
Well, when I talk about the National Disability Insurance Agency and the scheme, I always think it's important to put into context the value of the scheme. It has meant a much fairer system for people with disabilities in Australia, and most of the people on the NDIA are receiving significant support and benefiting from that support. And 200,000 of the 530,000 people on the scheme have never received disability services before. So it's a great step forward in social welfare. It's probably the biggest piece of social welfare in Australia since Medicare back in the 1970s. And but in the last few years, it has been limited, a bit like employees with disabilities, by negative assumptions about sustainability. It's also been limited by the fact that a lot of resources that were meant to support the 90% of people with disabilities outside the scheme have been sucked into the scheme, so that so that it's become, the scheme has become an oasis in the desert, and that level of contestability has put a lot of pressure on the scheme. So we've got to address some of these things. We've firstly got to address the myth that the scheme is not sustainable, and that the scheme is a huge weight for the Australian economy to carry. Because, you know, per capita just did some research late last year or early this year, which indicated for every dollar spent on the NDIA, $2.25 flows into the Australian economy. And if you compare that with defence dollars, where for every dollar spent only 90 cents flows into the Australian economy, the NDIA is a huge contributor, not just to people with disabilities, but to the Australian economy as a whole. Hundreds of thousands of workers are being employed who were not employed before the NDIA. So it's a significant part of driving our economy. But there are problems in the scheme. There should not be 4,000 people waiting in the queue for the AAT to have decisions reviewed. There should not be the level of contestability that there is. It should be a more positive experience for all of its participants, not just many. And so those are the things that I and the rest of the board will be, the refreshed board led by Kurt Fernley, will be looking to turn around. But it's a big ship, and big ships take a long time to turn around. So these sorts of changes, I think, will be important, but they'll also be gradual.
Graeme, thank you very much. I think, Cheryl, that was the last of the provided questions.
Yes.
To you, thank you for reading those out. Graeme, if it's all right with you, we might just open up the floor just to make sure there's no one in the room with us today who has any additional questions while we have you here with us. If anyone has a question for Graeme, could you please raise your hand?
How do we raise our hands?
I think we've done too good a job in answering all the questions, Graeme.
Actually, Nick,
Yes.
Nathan Thomas would like to ask a question.
Thank you. Nathan, please ask your question.
Oh, thanks so much. Graeme, thank you so much for that. That's just so inspiring to listen to you. Just a really quick question. So I'm a recruiter and I used to be an accountant. I've never had a vision impaired person apply for a position before. So, you know, like we would love to help, we'd love to accommodate people, you know, because like there's such a shortage of staff, but I don't know how, you know, whether we're not doing the right thing about trying to connect with people with vision impairment. Well,
that may be a part of the problem. It may be that, you know, there are low expectations by people who are blind or vision impaired to work in that area. It's exciting to see you here at the summit, because clearly just by that alone, or the symposium, because just by that alone you're demonstrating your interest in employing people with disabilities or people who are blind or vision impaired. And I'm sure that now that you've identified that, the team at the Eye to the Future project will be reaching out to you to offer you some opportunities to progress that, either through recruitment or through opportunities for internships, etc., etc. So Nathan, now that you've said you're interested to dip your toe in the water, I'm sure someone will make that happen.
Awesome. Thanks, Graeme.
Absolutely. Cheryl, do we have any other hands raised in the room, please?
No, we don't. That's all for now.
All right. Graeme, thank you so much for giving us so much of your time this morning. We really greatly appreciate it for your insights and expertise. Thanks again.
Thanks, Nicole. It was great to be here.